In three, two, one, and we are live. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us this virtual jug session. Today, I have with me Isabel. Hi, Isabel. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. So, before getting into the presentation for today, let me send a couple of words here for our audience. Um, One of the things that I want to tell you is that you can join us on our Slack channel. So you can go to virtualjug.com. Not only you can follow the session over there if you're not, but there is a link that you can join right on the top. Join us on Slack. Go to the live session channel, and then you can communicate with us and try to post any questions that you might have for today's session to Isabel. Then I'll be happy to relay any feedback that you have to Isabel during the session. If you don't have any Slack, or if you prefer, you can also use the YouTube comments, so that will be great as well. Um, Other than that, I think there is not much to introduce. So Isabel is going to talk to us about a very interesting topic for today, which is how to contribute to an open source project, both as a maintainer and a developer. There is a very interesting topic, especially because a lot of us work in the open source industry. So we, of course, we're very excited to work on new things, and we end up doing a lot of that work. But it is interesting because when someone new comes in, they usually don't see these kind of sessions that Isabel prepared for us. So I think that will be interesting to follow for newcomers to see how easy it is to contribute to open source. So without any further delays, Isabel, I'm going to hand it over to you. So thank you so much for being here with us and have some fun.
Thank you. So I'll share the screen in a second. Let's see. Okay. So can you see my presentation right now?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. So hi everyone again. I'm Isabel and I'm a software engineer at Cobalti, and an open source, let's say, enthusiast. And today I want to talk about this topic because it has been a huge part of my career so far. In particular, I want to talk about my experience contributing to open source from a contributor's and a maintainer perspective, and share some tips and stories along the way. So, as I said before, I'm a software engineer. I work at Cobalti. I'm currently based in London, but I'm from Portugal. And some things that I do in my volunteer time, I'm an admin, one of the admins for an ETB open source, and I'm a contributor and maintainer naturally. Um, I'm also a community leader for NETB London, and I participated in multiple open source programs. I participated in Google Summer of Code 2018 as a student and 2020 as an admin. And I also was a mentor for Google Coding program in 2019. And I also mentor at Coding Black Females, in particular in the Black Coder program. Um, so what to expect from this talk? I'll first start from the contributor's perspective, how I became a contributor, and several lessons that I learned and tips that I learned as a contributor to be a better contributor. Um, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I became a maintainer, how I started maintaining, how I maintain now, and then again, 7 lessons that I learned and tips as a maintainer. And in the end, some final thoughts just to summarize everything that we heard. So starting to start off as a contributor, how everything started. So for a long time, I heard this term about this open source, right? And I knew that we could contribute to open source, but I didn't quite know what it was. Right? I just know that if I contributed to an open source project, I could be boosting my technical skills and building up a portfolio. So for a long time, I wanted to contribute to open source. And it actually took me some time. And my concern in the beginning was how to start, right? Uh, which projects do I contribute to? How can I find time to contribute in my spare time? So it kind of took a long time for me to do something about it. So around 2016, I heard about Google Summer of Code through a colleague in college, and I decided to apply. Basically, Google Summer of Code is when students are paired with open source organizations, and they work throughout the summer in an open source project. And they also have mentors to help them around. Some of the organizations that usually participate, it's Mozilla, Apache, Jenkins, Python Software Foundation, Anita B Open Source, the one that I participated to. But in 2016, I got rejected. I got rejected and I just continued my life. I was in college. I was like, okay, and this is so competitive. How could I ever be accepted? Um, so then one day I learned about another open source initiative, which is Plentiful Pull Requests. And this initiative happens in December, and basically you can contribute to open source to an open source project that is listed on the website throughout the month of December. And I guess because it had a Christmas theme, I guess that's what prompted me to work on it. So I basically went to the website and I searched for Markdown projects because I wanted to start small. Right, I didn't know really what to do with open source. I just wanted to start small with documentation contributions. So I found a repository called Hire Me, which is basically a repository with resources for job hunt. And I saw the contribution guidelines and it was fairly simple. Fork this repo, read the contribution guidelines that I was already reading, add yourself as a contributor to the credits markdown file, open a pull request and get it approved. And that's what I did and it got approved. I basically added the job board that I saw that was missing there. And the maintainer reviewed, approved, and thanked my contribution. So this was like the first time I contributed to open source. It was a tiny bit thing, but I got to learn about the GitHub. In this case, I was contributing on GitHub platform, the open source workflow. So then I heard about Google Summer of Code again, 2018, my last year of college. And I think by this time I knew a little bit more about open source. So I came in with a fresh perspective, the way I approach the application phase and all. So this time I was accepted, right? Surprise, I said this in the intro. So I was accepted into an ETB open source that at the time was called Sisters Community. Um, and I worked for 3 months straight with the community, with mentors and the organization. So this was my first experience really working on a project for a long period of time, completely in the open. And this is actually where I learned most of open source. So what did I learn from being a contributor? As I said before, I have 7 lessons that I want to talk about. The first one is it helps caring about what you're contributing to. And what do I mean about this? So you're a contributor in your volunteer time, right? In your spare time. You're volunteering time of your life to contribute to open source. So for you to arrange time and patience to work on something, it helps caring about. You don't have to. I contributed to projects like one time and then I never got to that project again. But if you want to make this a consistent thing, it helps having at least a strong motivation while you're doing it. And in this way, perhaps it can help you better adapt your schedule, with work and other commitments to contribute to open source. And this leads me to why I contribute. So today I contribute for many reasons. Some of the reasons were more prevalent in the beginning of my journey, but they ended up evolving throughout time. So at first, I wanted to practice and learn new skills and build a portfolio. And actually, I still want, like, I still like doing that because I learned a lot from open source. But eventually, as I participated in the open source Google Summer of Code program, and also after that program, my other types of contributions, I started also discovering this volunteerism side of it. this giving back to the community. Um, and for example, we often depend on open source libraries, right? When if you're a developer and you're coding in a project, you will often use some open source software, right? And there's also social for good tech for social good project out there. So I kind of think, this is just another form of volunteering, and volunteering to such projects, helps keeping the open source ecosystem going, right? So, and also I try to, also my way of giving back to the community is while maintaining repositories, I can maintain in a way that I welcome beginners, that I help beginners get started. And I think that's also giving back to the community. And also I love the community aspect of it. I mean, I'm an admin for the Anita B open source community. And I really love just interacting with people from all around the world, different range of experience, people that I can mentor or people that can mentor me. I just love this whole community aspect of it. So remember, if you wish to be consistent, reflect about your motivations. The second lesson is there's a lot of resources and projects out there for you to contribute. There's a different range of projects. There's projects that only have Markdown, so doesn't involve code. You don't have to code to contribute to those projects. There's also not just software projects, but also projects that can interact with hardware. That's another type of project. And you can also find like libraries you use at work, but you can also find applications. Um, so a small tip in here, I would say if you're starting out, you can always think about apps you already use and that they are open source. So an example of projects, this is like a lot of logos here, but I just want to call out some projects. For example, Scala Exercises, which is a website that you can practice Scala, and I've used it before. This is open source. Basically, you can contribute to the content. Dev, which is a blogging platform, it's open source. Awesome, which represents awesome lists like Awesome Python, Awesome Java, Visual Studio Code, a code editor. IFME is a mental health application, community driven. I remember one day this year, right, because of COVID, World Health Organization has a Flutter application in their organization, and they were asking for volunteers. So there's a variety of projects out there and communities like Open Food Facts, Open Data Kit. So just keep this in mind when you want to contribute to something, what you wish to contribute to. And there's also some initiatives. There's Google Summer of Code that I participated on, 24 pull requests I already talked about. Season of Docs, this is very interesting. So Google Summer of Code is focused on coding contributions, but Season of Docs is especially for targeting technical writers, people that write documentation throughout the whole summer to help open source project. Outreachy, it's like Google Summer of Code, but it focused on, instead of being locked to students, because Google Summer of Code, you have to be a student to participate, Outreachy targets underrepresented groups in tech. And there's also Rails Girls Summer of Code. There's a bunch of projects. And a shout out to Hacktoberfest because it's happening right now. And you can contribute as a contributor or a maintainer. If you have a project, you can assign Hacktoberfest labels to the issues of your project or has a topic in your repo and you're participating as a maintainer. And you also can contribute as a contributor, of course. And I think if you have like 4 pull requests, you get a t-shirt or something. So lesson 3, you don't have to code to contribute. And I think I already gave this hint sometimes throughout this talk, right? So this was the most revealing lesson for me because I heard about open source and it was always related to developers, right? So it's like, oh, the only way that I can contribute is if I don't know, write an entire feature or fix a bug. And this is not true. And this is something I discovered throughout Google Summer of Code. So for example, if you test an app and report an issue, that's an open source contribution. You created an issue, you're helping the community and the maintainer know that there's a bug to fix, for example. If you want to contribute to documentation, documentation is so important. You can contribute to that. If you're a designer, you can create mockups or design assets. So here's some examples. Uh, this is basically an example of someone who decided to contribute to with a logo uh, for um, for a command line tool. So it doesn't have a graphical user interface, but this contributor still wanted to contribute with a logo, which ended up being this, right? So this was a valid contribution. Quality assurance. Uh, this is one that I really like. Basically, during Google Summer of Code, I was writing my project right from scratch. And I wouldn't have time to do heavy testing. So I encouraged community members to, hey, the backend that I wrote is available here in this link in Amazon. So you can just test through the Swagger UI, test the app. And someone tested and noticed that you could register with the username, password, and name empty. This was kind of embarrassing, but because this contributor took her time to contribute, I managed, someone managed to fix it. Um, Another example. So basically in our community right now, we're trying to have this quality assurance process because I experienced some stuff back in the days. So I really think it's important to test in all levels. So not just test what is deployed, but also testing a PR. And I have quality assurance engineer, a senior quality assurance engineer working closely with me in the community, and I get to learn so much from her. But basically, she came up with this template for someone to test a code from a PR and post it. And actually, this idea came from when I contributed to other projects in the Google Summer of Code application phase. I saw these. I saw someone testing an Android application in multiple Android versions. So basically, this is also a very interesting contribution for you to do. It helps keep the quality of the app, right? The project. Content. This is an example of, I was practicing exercises on the Scala exercises website, especially the functional programming in Scala. And basically, I noticed something here that it should be the pipe sign, right? I think it's pipe, right? It shouldn't be this, what you see there. And right now I don't remember in English. So I basically contributed to this because I know it was open source. It had the icon on the website. So I submitted a pull request to contribute to it. And this was approved and merged. And voila, this was a contribution that now, looks correct, the content. Another example, bug fixes. So I fixed a bug in one of the projects from Open Data Kit community. And what I find interesting about this that I want to highlight is I didn't come up with a solution to fix this bug by myself. Basically, I saw an issue which was available and someone had already tried to solve the issue, but the contributor abandoned the issue. So I could see the pull request and I could see, okay, so what is left is basically just addressing code review comments from one of the maintainers. So that's what I did. I replicated what was already done and um, I basically addressed the code review comments and this was accepted and it was merged. Now, every time I talk about open source, I really like to talk about this example because it's not very obvious, right? So this is from a blog post that is there that I read when I was researching about CSS community. I need to be open source. And basically someone came with the old design and someone, a community member called to the attention that in that design, the girl didn't seem very active. It didn't seem like she was using the wheelchair. So basically the design was changed to having the girl holding the wheelchair. It seems more active. It's not like she's waiting for someone to do something for her. And this is an open source contribution, right? Imagine if you are within a community, you can help with bringing your unique perspective to a project. So now just to talk about other ways to contribute, in case they're not so obvious, review pull requests. You can literally go to GitHub, to a random project, and review a pull request, add a comment. So if you see something that can be improved in a pull request, you can just review. It doesn't hurt. You may not have mergeability access, but you will help in the code review process as a whole. Implement features and fix bugs. We already sort of know the coding aspect of open source, right? You can be a mentor for an open source program like Google Summer of Code or Outreachy. There's a lot of programs that require mentors to help the participant. You can help others contribute, right? Within a community, for example, if someone has a question and you already know the answer, you can answer and help that contributor. And also, you're reducing the load of having to answer from maintainers. You can write documentation, as I said before. You can do outreach or research, which is basically you can write blog posts, you can promote the project on social media, talk about it in public speaking engagements, right, like this one. You can report bugs. You can test the app and test in a very weird way where you catch a bug and you can report it. You can manage issues and contributors. So, for example, I'm a maintainer for one project, right? And I have certain people that have a certain level of access that they can assign labels to issues and assign contributors to issues as well. So you can totally help with this. And well, overall, bring what you're good at to the table. I remember that when I contributed to NETB open source, I saw that they didn't have topics for each repo of the organization. And I noticed that, if they had topics like this project is Android, Java, something, this could help the organization profile and contributors find the projects faster. So another lesson is not all projects and communities behave the same way. So what do I mean by this? I can see this from a lot of lens. So for example, not all projects or communities involved may be welcoming to beginners, right? So this is something that you have to gauge once you see community discussions and things like that. For example, in our community, we have open sessions on a weekly basis that anyone from the community can attend. And we sometimes have Ask Me Anything sessions that, again, are not open sessions to perhaps discuss something from the community, but it's someone can come and, hey, how can I get started with open source, right? And also, not all organizations may have bandwidth to mentor someone, right? Imagine a project with one maintainer only, one community manager. It may not have resources to mentor beginners. So it's something to pay attention at. Also, contribution guidelines are not the same. For example, the first contribution that I didn't have to create an issue. But in the community I'm in now, we have this rule of to submit a pull request, you should create an issue first to get approved by a maintainer. Another thing is that I think I remember experience at least once. Some organizations that have a corporate side, I would say, have a contributor license agreement. So you contribute with your code or whatever contribution it is, you open a pull request, it's all good, but you'll have to sign something to give permission to use your code. And this doesn't happen with all the projects. It's usually with big corporations, organizations, I would say. And there's also different ways of communicate. There's some communities that use Discord as communication channel, or Zulip, or Slack. So it really depends. What I want you to take away from here is there's no one way to handle an open source project or community. Another thing is be honest and set expectations. So one thing that I see happening a lot in open source is sometimes contributors pick an issue and not follow through, or choose certain issues, don't choose certain issues in fear of not being able to contribute. So now as a maintainer, I can comprehend better the impact that this can have on the maintainer side. So The lesson that I learned is it's good if you set expectation and are honest with maintainers, right? So they can manage expectations well. For example, if you are assigned to an issue and you get stuck, right? Don't just stay quiet. Ask for help. And in that way, the maintainer or reviewers or the community as a whole can help you get unstuck, not stuck faster, right? So this is something to keep in mind. And you can also reach out to other community members, not just the maintainer for that. I also see sometimes people abandoning issues. So perhaps this is not because you don't know how to do the issue, but because of other commitments. And that's totally okay, like lack of time. So I would say let the maintainers know. They will appreciate. I really appreciate when someone tells me, hey, I have exams now, so I cannot continue with this issue. Good. I will make it available again and perhaps assign for someone who has time, and in this way, you're helping me move the project forward. It doesn't have to be you doing something, solving an issue. You can, if you don't have time, just let us know. And as an example, in our community, we have these three rule days, a rule of 3 days for responsiveness. So if you don't update us within 3 days, we can unassign you the issue, or perhaps we might ask, hey, how are you doing with this issue? And if you don't respond, we may reassign the issue, right? And also, just a quick note: it's not nice to just take up issues, right? That other people who want to contribute could be contributing to that same issue. So another lesson is confidence comes with time, and this is another blocker that I've seen, not just in me, in other people too. And I have to say that after I did my first contribution, so remember, I for 2 years I knew about the thing. I applied to Google Summer Code. I was rejected, and I stopped again. And then in 2017, I finally contributed during 24 pull requests. And I noticed that my confidence improved once I learned the open source usual contribution workflow, right? And I felt much more confident also to intervene within the community once I start communicating and also seeing discussions, um, yeah, and understanding how the community worked. I'm a little bit shy in talking in public forums, so that was kind of a big breakthrough. Um, and other things, you can start small. Don't forget about it. Um, don't start with big projects if you're starting right now, like huge projects that have a huge code base. Do it at your own pace. For example, I started with documentation. Only after that, I started contributing more with code. And I know there's some intimidating projects out there. So again, keep in mind, keep it simple. So I talked about the contribution workflow plenty of times already, but I just want to give an idea. So if you have to contribute to an issue that involves code, this is the usual workflow that you would have to follow. You would fork the repository, for example, on GitHub. You fork the repo, so you have your copy of the repository. You clone it to your development environment, either via GUI or a terminal using Git. You work on it, you commit and push, and then you submit the PR. And throughout this whole process, if you have doubt, please ask questions. And also, once you submit the PR, there's also a time where you may have feedback from maintainer, and you may have to go back to work on it and do git commit push, commit and push. Okay. So, seven lesson from contributor side of things is to get out most of open source. This requires effort. So one of the current admins and a huge inspiration for me in open source told me once during Google Summer of Code when I was a student that what you get from open source, it's somewhat related to what you give to open source, right? Give in terms of time, you know, mind capacity. So she basically was talking about the effort that one puts in open source. And I now understand what she meant, right? So learning new skills, getting successful contribution out of it requires effort. It may require for us to dig a little bit on a project that we don't know nothing about, right? And to make a successful contribution, solve an issue, we may have to learn more about the code base, learn about the history of the project. So this takes time, and that's why I advise to start small, right? So you learn the open source contribution workflow, and then you go to perhaps bigger projects where you already have, you know that you have to look into the code. You may have to talk with community members to ask for help if there's no documentation about it. So always keep in mind this, right? And it takes time. It takes time to learn a code base that you don't know nothing about it. And the more you research, the more you learn, right? And also remember, one of the core values of open source is transparency, right? So hopefully public discussions, hopefully you don't have to ask something that was already asked, and you can simply read what they responded to a question that you also had in mind, okay? So now that we know that it requires effort, I want to tell certain things to keep in mind when you're searching for a community or a project. So is the community beginner friendly? Do they have a code of conduct, reporting guidelines? Do they enforce that? Is the community transparent? Again, transparency is key. So conversations have to happen out in the open, so everybody is kept on the loop. Is the community inclusive? Look at community discussions, see if they are inclusive and can be inclusive in many ways, right? Uh, are they open to different types of contributions? Imagine that you want to contribute to quality assurance. Do they have processes in place? Are they interested in having processes in place? Are they open for new designs? And also, is the project active? So basically, you can look at the last commit, for example. If the last commit for a project was 5 years ago, right? Perhaps the project is not being actively maintained. So this is something to keep attention of. So after 3 months of learning about how to be a contributor, I became a maintainer. I basically just asked, community manager of the community, hey, can I become a maintainer since I know so much about the project I'm working on? She said yes, and I became officially a maintainer. And I'm saying officially like this because I was already kind of maintaining in the sense that I was engaging with the community. I was helping already contributors contributing to it, reviewing pull requests, helping with quality assurance. And I was already kind of the go-to person to ask about the project that I was developing. So starting with the maintainer, right? At this time, I thought, well, this can be fun, right? Because it's another layer to these open source types of contributions, right? And I already knew that, okay, open source is not this unattainable thing that it's, gatekept and only a few people can contribute. So I decided what type of maintainer I wanted to be. So how did I start? One of the things that I try to prioritize is having beginner issues, because I know this is one of the blockers for people to get into open source, is lack of beginner issues. So I tried to split big issues, for example, creating doc strings or Java docs, Kotlin docs, creating in code documentation. I tried to split this, instead of having a big issue for this, I created multiple issues per files so that I could have multiple beginner issues. And that's what I did. And I assigned them with first timers only, which is the label we use at our community, to basically help onboarding more people into open source and have easy ways for people to get themselves into open source. So I also, whenever I can give a verbose description to an issue, I try to. If I know the solution, for example, for an issue that I came up with, I can give hints for that. I can say, hey, you probably have to look at this file here, right? And I answer contributors on Zulib, so on the communication channels, basically. This is an example when few people help me on reviewing PR. So being a maintainer doesn't mean that you are the only one reviewing the PR. So I make sure to have the minimum two number of approvals for a PR. So even if I approve, I'll have to get somebody else's approve on the PR. So by this time you might be thinking, okay, so is it that great? Is it all fun now? And I have to say, well, it also has frustrating times. For example, when contributors don't follow the project guidelines, right? Or we write documentation for the project, right, to help you become autonomous. And when contributors ask questions that are clearly stated in the documentation, can be a little bit frustrating, right? Because you're just repeating information that you could have gotten by looking into documentation. Sometimes people also report issues without enough information for me to understand, okay, how can I validate this? What is this really about? And also, sometimes I can lose track of time if I have too many things to review, and then, oh gosh, a night has passed because I was reviewing plenty of stuff. So becoming a maintainer comes with extra responsibility. That's basically what I have to say. And I have an example for this. So one time I merged this PR that broke the Swagger user interface of the backend application. It didn't broke the functionality, but it broke the Swagger UI, and that was very important because that's a way that other contributors can test the app without having to set up the development environment. So someone doesn't need to code to test the app. So because I already knew about the code base, I thought, okay, maybe I can fix this. And I managed to fix this. I'm glad I did. But what if I didn't? Perhaps I would have to revert the commit. So it comes with extra responsibility. And let me say, this app is not properly in production. So, it's not very high stakes if I had broken a functionality. So just imagine with open source projects that uh, are already being used in production. And we didn't have a QA process at the time. This is also what prompted me to wait a minute. We cannot just review. We have to test every single thing because we never know. But it's not all only frustrations, okay? There's examples which I really love when a contributor asks for help, and if for any reason nobody answers in time, they figure out by themselves. This makes me super happy, right? And this leads me back to the lesson of contributing to open source requires effort. So what did I learn of being a maintainer so far? Here it comes, the 7 lessons. Okay, first lesson, you don't have to know everything. I learned this. Okay, so I became a maintainer and I knew a lot about the code base and I knew where to look for information, but that didn't mean that I knew everything about Python, the language that the project used, or I knew everything about Kotlin and Android, right? And this is something that I learned, and I still have so much to learn as a maintainer. So this is something important to keep in mind. If you create a project, for example, right, you're the most expert person in that project. So again, you don't have to know everything. Lesson 2, you can learn from contributors. I already gave some hints from these, but that's basically it, because I don't know everything, right? Someone comes with a fresh perspective and perhaps with more knowledge. I had some contributors suggesting great things, great improvements for the backend and the Android project that made me think and reflect. Here's an example. For example, a contributor suggested us to use Black, which is a tool for code formatting in Python. And what I learned here is the tool itself. I didn't know this existed, basically. So you see, this is just another example of things that I learned through by maintaining a project. Lesson 3, you can get people from a wide range of experience. So you don't control who gets to your project. It can be a newbie, a very junior person, or it can be a senior, a very experienced person. So you cannot just expect. And the great thing here is you have an opportunity, either case. If it's an experienced person, you probably learn from them. If it's a very junior person, you can teach them, you can mentor them, you're giving them access to open source, right? You're giving them learnings, new experiences. And also, for example, there was this time that I was taking too much time to review a pull request. And I did a live session, a live code review session with this contributor because the PR was taking ages to get merged, and it's still. But basically, I had this live session where I was code reviewing with her, and she was learning from me. So this is not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just it's something that you cannot count on the experience that someone will have when it gets into your project. Lesson four, it can be super stressful to maintaining a demanding project. I have to say that, well, the project that I'm maintaining now, it has like 100 stars, 300 forks, and I actually know that a lot of the traction comes from Google Summer of Code. People are already preparing for that. But I have to say, even when it didn't have like 100 stars or people wanting to contribute every day, um, it could be overwhelming, right? Because then I have to set boundaries of time for myself, right? I don't want to spend my whole spare time just reviewing things. Um, and this also brings me to the next thing, okay? And for example, just sorry, these few weeks I have been a bit overwhelmed, and I'm so grateful that I have people in the community that are helping me with managing contributors, managing labels, reviewing pull requests. So, and this brings me to the next lesson, which is you can share work as a maintainer. It's not because you're a maintainer of a sole maintainer of a project that you have much access and all that the project just stays. That you are the only one working on it. No, I have people who have access to assign contributors, right? And assign labels, right? And we have now a process, for example, that when people assign ready to merge, it means that it already went through two reviews, two approvals, um, testing from quality assurance process, and then ready to merge. So sometimes I check these PRs and I just check, okay, does it have all, does the code look fine? Was it really tested? And then I merge it. So you can share totally work with other people. And I also have, again, the QA engineer that helps me so much in the community that it takes a little bit the burden of worrying with the QA process and onboarding people. So another lesson is contributors don't just come to your project. This is something that I also learned out with time. In my case, we have Google Summer of Code, so we kind of get a lot of traction from there. But imagine if we didn't, right? Having a community also helps, right? Because I tell a friend tells a friend, hey, we have this community, yada yada. But basically, as a maintainer, as a maintainer or an owner of the project, you have to do some work in terms of promoting the project, right? Even though I was in a community, the project after Google Summer of Code ended, I didn't get contributors right away. So I had to continuously create newcomers issues, and I'll get to this now, right? In the tips to get contributors, but I had to do some work. So things you can do: promote the project through outreach, participate in open source initiatives like Hacktoberfest. Just put the label Oktoberfest in some issues, and you are already making your project visible to new contributors. You can write blog posts, you can talk about your project in conferences or meetups. Easy development environment. This is very important. It can be very discouraging if I spend like half an hour trying to set up a project, right? Um, so keep this in mind. Make sure that the setup of your project, right? If you're optimizing for coding contributions, that the setup it happens in the short term. I was in a conference the other day, VHC, and I heard from in a talk that 5 minutes is a good time to set up the project. So try to aim at that. Another thing is have a roadmap. I have to admit, I'm at fault at this just a little bit because I have future issues, future features in the wiki of the project. So you can kind of see where the project is going. However, I don't have a roadmap. And what I want to say with this is basically that by having a roadmap, you can you can send the signal to contributors that the project has future, and there's things that we are working upon. And also, a lot of times I keep rejecting or accepting new features, but in this case, rejecting features that perhaps if I had a roadmap, people would already know, okay, this is not the direction the project is going, right? Another thing is having beginner issues. And I said already this, and I will say again. we should have good first issues or first timers only issues for beginners. You never know when a beginner, a newcomer to your project will become a long-term contributor, right? So this is very important, and this is one of the major things to attract new people, because they will feel, okay, this is a first timers only, perhaps it's a little bit easier and I can get into open source to this issue. Another thing is have communication channels. In the community, I mean, we use Zulip and we previously used Slack. There are other communities that use Discord. So make sure you have a tool like this, like a real-time tool, a synchronous tool that you can communicate. If someone has a quick question or a big discussion to have, you have communication channels to support that. And another thing is good documentation, which I will talk about, more about it now. So basically, documentation is super important. I could speak about this for hours, but it's all about, giving autonomy to contributors. This is not like working in a work environment in a job where you may have people you can, send a message, a DM, and hey, can you help me with this? It doesn't happen like that, right? You cannot count on that direct approach. So documentation is super important, and this will help your contributors get quickly ramped up with your project and set up and familiar. So this just helps the onboarding process for the contributors. What I want to say here is that, you start the documentation, right? You write the documentations and contributors read. But again, you can share the work. So after you have some initial documentation, you can always create new issues for contributors to improve your documentation. Or also a contributor comes with a fresh new mindset to your project. So they can actually come with ideas to improve documentation for future contributors. Another thing is community profile. So on GitHub, you can see Insights tab on the project and community in the side menu. And you can have an idea if your project is following community standards, like having a README, having a code of conduct, contributing guidelines, license, issue templates or pull requests. This can really help, to have properly arranged issues. So now I want to give some resources, right? So imagine you're starting a project and you don't know, how do I choose a license? There's this website, choose a license, that will tell you about different types of licenses and the impact of it. I'm actually not very good with it. The project that I am maintaining, because it started with Google Kernel Code, just started with the license that we're used to. Okay, I just clicked this link. There's also this code of conduct, the link that I just clicked, basically. This website has a good code of conduct. I'm saying good because it has a lot of rules or guidelines. So if you don't feel comfortable writing your own code of conduct, can go to this website that has a template. Just fill some fields like whom to contact if someone violates the code of conduct. So this can be very helpful. I clicked the link again. What is happening? Okay. Okay, you already see. Shocker. Okay, next. Best practices for maintainers and contributors and community, open source communities in general. Open source guide is an awesome resource. Every time I go there, it has new content. So, and from everything, even the legal side of open source, which I'm really not aware. Just a shout out to automation tools. It helps having some automation set for your project, like checking code coverage or having builds for each pull request. You can set up this via GitHub Actions, Travis CI, Circle CI. You can also have code static analysis, for example, with Codacy. And these things will reduce a little bit of work from the maintainers or reviewer side. A quick shout out to a bot that is all contributors / all contributors on GitHub. And this basically helps you, highlight types of contributions that perhaps are not reflected by submitting a pull request. So I really like this bot and I'm trying to set up this in our community. I haven't yet, but just want to give the shout out if you care about that. And for example, giving a shout out to someone who contributes to translations, design, content, you can use that. So final lesson of being a maintainer. Being a maintainer is like being a leader, right? So uh, you are the person or the group of people who define the roadmap, manage the contributions, manage the community around the project. This is a huge responsibility. You have to perhaps enforce contribution guidelines, right? They are there for a reason. But most importantly, you have to enforce code of conduct. So I had an experience this year, this summer, which was basically someone violated the code of conduct on GitHub. They talked very poorly to one of my co-maintainers for mentorship Flutter project. And I didn't know what to do, honestly. So I asked for help of the other admins, and one of the admins responded because I think she's already has experience with this. She responded, and we temporarily banned the contributor from the community for like 2 weeks, I think. So it comes with a big responsibility, and it's like a leadership position. So don't forget about that. So final thoughts, I promise it will be short. What can we do to help each other in open source now that we know both sides of it? So don't forget, this is a two-way relationship. A lot of the things in open source has to do with people interactions, right? That's where we may get frustrations from if we ask for help and we don't get the help we want. So remember, this is a two-way relationship, right? In open source, we rarely work alone. We may work with another community member we don't know from, we don't know, or a maintainer. Another thing, or better yet, three things, is be patient. So both sides should be honest and frontal about, for example, commitments. So, for example, it's not because you submit a pull request right now that you'll get an answer right now, right? We are doing this in our spare time. So be patient about the response you're getting from a maintainer, and also as a maintainer, be patient for the time response you're getting from a contributor, okay? Also, be open. So be open about different ways of thinking, developing, and coding. For example, a contributor can come up with an idea that you haven't thought for a specific issue. So you should be open to that. And as a contributor, you should also be open. For example, if you do this issue, you solve the issue, submit the PR, and the maintainer says, well, this is not actually, this could be improved in this way, right? So both sides can have valuable input. So being open is key. Another thing is be kind, right? So as a maintainer reviewing PR, someone took the time, their spare time usually, to contribute to your project, right? So I try to think contributors every time I get a chance. If I don't, it's because I forgot. But think for their time, for their suggestions, for new features perhaps they are suggesting, even if it's not meant to be, you can thank them, right? And as a contributor, remember, imagine if you get a big code review on your PR. Remember that the maintainers spend time on their spare time to review properly your PR and give you constructive feedback, okay? And last slide, I promise. The world is a better place when everyone takes time to understand one another. Yes. So now that I talked a little bit about how it is a journey of a contributor or a maintainer, I think that I can be a better contributor, understanding the maintainers, and I can be a better maintainer, understanding the contributor. Yes, and that's it. Thank you. That's it.
Hey, Isabel. Yes, that was impressive.
Oh,
Thank you
wow.
so much for your presentation. That was great. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, we have at least a few questions here, and I didn't even want to interrupt you because you were going, you just going flying through the entire content.
Oh my.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So this is a question from Domingos Manuel. He's
Mm,
asking, so on your presentation, you mentioned a few times that you participated in the Google Summer of Code, right?
yeah.
And he wants to learn to know how is the application process to Google Summer of Code,
Mm.
and why were you rejected initially? Were they looking for experience that you did not have, or what, can you share some more details on that?
Yes.
What's the process and what are they looking for to be able to apply?
Yes, I can. So one thing that I said in the presentation is very important is not every organization works the same way. So I applied to Anita B. org open source, and I oh, how can I say? I like their mission, right? So I felt drawn into it. There's other communities very competitive as well. I mean, all organizations are competitive, right? Because what matters is the organization is that you got into the program. So in the organization I applied to, they value, we value not just code contribution. So code contribution isn't the be all and all. So you can contribute to our community in many different ways without having to code, and we will still value it. I know that other communities care more about code contributions. For example, if you don't have code contributions, they might reject you right away. So this depends on the organization, and usually organizations will have some tips. Google Summer of Code website has tips on how to be a good student, have a good student profile in terms of contributing and caring about the community. But again, there's some communities that may worry about coding contributions, and there's others that may not worry about that, right? Because, for example, you may contribute with a coding issue, but if you never talk in the community forum, that's also not good. Because throughout the whole program, you have to communicate in public, and it cannot be just mentors asking you to talk, right? So this is just to give an overview of application may depend. But in general, you have to submit the proposal to an organization. Usually organizations have their own projects, ideas, or a project that you can contribute with with a new idea. In my case, I applied with a new project the second time. And the first time I tried to apply to improve a project that already existed, which was Power Up. At the time, it was so competitive. There were so many issues, but also so many contributors. I didn't know how to contribute. And at the time, I think I thought that coding was the only thing I could do. And also, I was much shyer, so I guess I didn't talk much in the communication channels, and my proposal was very, very bad, like 2 pages, right? So this doesn't show that in the proposal, you basically have to show that, okay, I know exactly startup what I have to do throughout the 3 months. You'll get reviews from mentors throughout the application phase when you submit your proposal. And I had that, for example, the second time and the first time as well. But the first time the proposal was so poor that, even the little feedback that I got, I didn't know what to do with it. But the second time I applied with a new project, mentorship system. So it came from, I wrote all the motivation. Why do I think these new projects should be implemented? Why do I think this is important? How will the backend be set up? In fact, initially, I just proposed Android application. And then one mentor said, well, what about the backend? So one important thing is when you submit the proposal, if mentors give you a review, follow the review, respond to the review, improve your proposal continuously, okay? And again, it depends on the organizations. So yeah, in this case, I understood that, okay, this community values, like, I was so busy with a part-time job and thesis, I really didn't have much time to code there. So I contributed in other ways. And again, this is for this community. But I would say important things are being communicative, talking in the community. So it's not just submitting a PR and that's it. No, you have to show that you're having some commitment with the community. Yes, did I go too long? Because I could talk.
No, that was fine. No worries. I think that then we still even having a couple of feedback here, so you can watch that later.
Okay,
but I think all people in the audience are really excited with your enthusiasm and your energy about presenting these topics.
Oh,
wow. So we have here another question from Pierre. He's asking, do you know any specific places or platforms for finding support for technical writers for new projects?
Oh wow. I don't know much. So things on the top of my mind. Season of Docs. This program, I don't know if it's bound to students, but Season of Docs, it happens throughout the summer. I'm not sure if they pay you like Google Summer of Code pays. I think they do, but you'll have to check. Season of Docs. It's a new program. So that's sort of a resource, and I'm sure that they may have guides there on, for example, oh, I forgot to give this tip. If you're looking to for a community, a well-established organization, look at the organizations that were accepted into Google Summer of Code. And you can also apply these for Season of Docs. See organizations that participated in Season of Docs. And for sure, those organizations are open for documentation contributions. What more? I know there's a community, Write the Docs. They have a Slack and stuff like that. So perhaps they have ideas of open source projects. I'm pretty sure they talk about it because I've seen it talk before, so I know. I hope this helps. I hope this helps.
I'm pretty sure it will. Well, Isabel, I think we reached our time limit. I really like to thank you for being here with us today and taking some time off to present this wonderful topic. I'm pretty sure that everyone in the audience really enjoyed it. So without any further delay, so let's wrap it up and say goodbye to the audience. So thank you so much for being here with us today, and
Thank you
hope to see you
all.
again soon into another session. Bye bye.